I'm going to start again by thanking the committee for the opportunity to talk about this, and I'm going to thank you again for it, because this is this issue that I'm about to speak on has been kind of a marquee issue for me for years. I've been advocating for it in a lot of different realms, and I'm hoping to just try to move that forward here if we can, right? So what I'm going to talk about today is a discussion on families who are enrolled in CDPAP. I want to preface this conversation by saying that this is about an FSS issue. This particular discussion is about an FSS issue. It is not part of the milieu that we all know surrounds CDPAP's recent shift to a single FI. This is completely separate FSS issue. I will start with a little background, however, just to make sure that everybody is knowledgeable and on the same page of where I'm coming from here. So the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, or CDPAP, is a program administered by the Department of Health that's designed to provide greater control and choice for people who have Medicaid and need assistance with activities of daily living and personal care. One of the ways it does this is by empowering people with the ability to select and manage the caregivers who assist them. Eligible people and their families who support them are aided in this process by CDPAP facilitators. These community-based organizations are located throughout New York State. So either on their own or with support, people who receive CDPAP services and their family caregivers are often able to recruit and engage personal assistants, their paid caregivers, from sources outside of their family home. Others receive CDPAP services through a family member living with them at home. CDPAP service delivery by a person living in the same home aligns with DHS policy, and it's an efficient and cost-effective method for service delivery, and its results in high-value outcomes. And as I'm sure you all realize, families who support loved ones at home who are both participating in CDPAP and also eligible for OPWDD services are families who undoubtedly are among some of our most challenged. So on July 1st, 2022, ADM number 2022-02-HAR, the Family Reimbursement ADM, established a policy that excludes families who OPWDD labeled as paid caregivers from participating in the Family Support Services Family Reimbursement Program. This program reimburses otherwise eligible families for up to $3,000 annually for OPWDD approved goods and services, including respite services that cannot be obtained through other channels. This exclusion included families who provide CDPAP services to a loved one at home. Now, at various times, I've been told that this rule change was implemented to make sure funds were getting, to the people most in need, getting to families who didn't have income, that it had to do with equity, and that OPWDD had to make a call in order to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. Meanwhile, all of these rationale may describe some of OPWDD's concerns. It appears that they are just that. Concerns. We're supposed to be guided by a strategic plan that relies on data and stakeholder engagement to drive the flexible, person-centered programs of the future, and by Commissioner Bear's commitment to our community to engage in a data-driven decision-making process that is more informed by people who actually use the services. So in the absence of a valid and reliable data set to support this rule change, and none has been forthcoming despite requests, these concerns are not valid for implementing this policy. They appear to be unsupported by data or the lived experience of those affected and the stakeholders who support them. The early and significant advocacy effort that our community undertook around this issue eventually led to a recommendation by this committee that access to reimbursement for goods and services be restored to these families. Members all supported that recommendation and OPWDD's enactment of it. Unfortunately, the recommendation did not include as a service the restoration of access to FSS family reimbursement for the respite services that are so critical for keeping some of our most challenged families intact and fully functioning. However, there was a commitment to take a further discussion of respite reimbursement exclusion at a later date, and I thank the committee for the opportunity to rekindle that discussion today. Just 1 second. Caregivers need an adequate respite The caregiver's need for adequate respite has been well studied and I think at this point undisputed. And of course, we all know that family stability is a critical component, perhaps the most critical component, driving the stability of OPWDD's entire system of care. Again, despite requests for data and lived experience that OPWDD relied on in implementing this rule change, it has not been forthcoming. Among other things, we do not know the number of families that have been excluded from family reimbursement because of this rule change, what the cost of maintaining their eligibility would have been, where that reduction of investment can be and has been redistributed to better support families and the system of care our entire community relies on every single day. We don't know the data and lived experience to support that this redistribution actually reached the families who were then or are now more in need than the families this policy excluded. We don't know the data and lived experience to support the notion that this rule change created a more equitable distribution of resources. We don't know what work was done prior to implementation to understand the potential unintended negative downstream financial and human costs that may arise from excluding these families. We don't know what work is being done to understand the impact of these rule changes on an ongoing basis. And finally, given the substantial disinvestment in family reimbursement that has followed the implementation of this ADM, our community would like to know why this exclusion was needed at all. In a world built on data-driven decision-making that is more informed by lived experience, answers to all of these questions would be known and foundational to any rationale that proposed rule changes such as these. There is, however, at least some data, lived experience, and stakeholder engagement that support the repeal of this policy in its entirety. This committee's 2023 Family Reimbursement ADM Follow-up Survey reported on input from 130 Family Reimbursement Program coordinators, FSS program agency contacts, and Family Reimbursement Committee members. Many, if not most of these participants had years and even decades of frontline FSS experience. The research sought to understand how the implementation of the Family Reimbursement ADM impacted OPWDD's ability to meet certain stated and statutory goals for the program. The study was conducted following the completion of the first 6 months of the ADM's implementation. This research was a retest of an earlier project that measured the same sentiment after the first 2 months of implementation. This follow-up study found that among this cohort, 64% of respondents believed that the ADM would reduce or greatly reduce OPWDD's ability to meet the goal of providing services in a way that is equitable, compared to only 12% who believed it would greatly enhance OPWDD's ability to achieve this important goal. The same study found that 67% of respondents believed that the ADM would reduce or greatly reduce OPWDD's ability to meet the goal of allocating our limited funding to the families most in need, compared to only 15% who believed it would enhance or greatly enhance OPWDD's ability to achieve this important goal. The lived experience shared by these professionals, family caregivers, and others was, to me, incredibly disheartening, and I'll share just a few of the many that were shared with us. I'm sad to see how FSS has changed so significantly that individuals with special needs are not able to access funding to cover items that increase their quality of life. It is also very unfortunate that parents that are paid to take care of their adult child are being penalized and not able to access this funding. 2, people with the least resources but need the most help will suffer the most from this. They don't have the money to front for months to wait for reimbursement and will give up on services they so greatly need and deserve. This is truly a shame. 3, the regulations and restrictions for this program are now so onerous and complex. I fear families who are stressed and overwhelmed and seeking resources of last resort will give up and not use it. It's a shame. The program used to be flexible enough to meet the needs of people who are truly in need. And finally, 4, the ADM has negatively impacted the way our organization has been able to assist those families with little or no financial means. We can no longer provide the goods and services which were most often requested by our consumers, such as clothing. These requests were not a luxury item, but rather a necessity for the underserved families we most often served. This data set, while not specifically speaking entirely to the paid caregiver exclusion that resides under the umbrella of this ADM, certainly must be assigned weight in this matter, given that very context and the expertise that provided this striking data set. What does speak directly to equity in this matter is an experience, lived experience, that was shared with me by a parent who provided CDPAP services to her loved one at home in accordance with DOH policy. Some time ago, she found herself unable to locate and hire appropriate caregivers from outside her home. This necessitated her leaving a job where she was on a career track with a leading New York State company. She put this incredible opportunity for her and her family's future behind her in order to provide for a rate at or near minimum wage the necessary and appropriate services that could not be found elsewhere. Because of this, under the rules of ADM 2022-02R, she no longer qualified for family reimbursement, and she still would not qualify for family reimbursement respite under existing regulations. She's not alone in this predicament, and instead of thanking her and supporting her for making this commitment and sacrifice, OPWDD further disadvantaged her and people like her by denying access to FSS family reimbursement. At the same time, we can think about a mother just like her, on a similar career path and in a similar, very challenging family situation. She may be able to secure CDPAP support for her family member from outside the home. If she does, she can keep her job, take advantage of all the opportunity that work provides for her and her family's future. She's still able to access FSS family reimbursement respite, while the mother who had to sacrifice her career to support her loved one would not be able to. This is not equity. This is the opposite of equity. And as you all know, I find it unacceptable. In a letter dated January 12, 2024, the People's Representative, our community's representative, then Senator John Mannion, as chair of the Senate Committee on Disabilities, wrote to then Commissioner Neifeld, quote, however, the changes to FSS via ADM 2022-02R have had a cascading effect on the financial and human costs felt by individuals with developmental disabilities and their families, like, for example, placing incontinence products on a list of non-allowables, or disqualifying enrolled consumer-directed personal assistance program family caregivers from receiving FSS reimbursements. He went on to say, quote, I'm opposed to the rule changes to the Family Support Services Program as revised in ADM 2022-02R. Likewise, in a letter dated February 26, 2024, the People's Representative, the representative of our community, Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, as chair of the Assembly Committee on People with Disabilities, wrote to then Commissioner Neifeld, quote, I implore you to consider the following specific concerns. She begins that list by stating, quote, the paid caregiver exclusion denies FSS support to the most challenged families. Assemblymember Seawright went on to say, quote, I'm opposed to the rule changes to the FSS program as revised in ADM 2022-02R. The FSS program must continue to complement the existing OPWDD services in enriching lives, not further restricting their freedom and choice. These unequivocal objections to the policy set forth in the Family Reimbursement ADM, unequivocal objections by both the chairs of both the Senate Committee on Disabilities and the Assembly Committee on People with Disabilities, include reversing the ongoing denial of family reimbursement for respite for those who OPWDD has labeled paid caregivers. That much is clear. I'm going to say just a few words on OPWDD's stated need to make a call in order to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. The state of New York, in our current enacted budget, earmarked $97 million for the provision of family support services. This $97 million earmark has existed for years, yet in fiscal 2023-2024, the latest year I have actual data for, OPWDD was only able to disperse about $41 million. Why did we need to implement this exclusionary policy when more than half of the funding the state of New York budgeted for FSS, over $50 million, was left uninvested? On a local scale, in 2023, Monroe Advisory Council had about $865,000 available for a family reimbursement program. But data show that only a third of those funds were utilized. This is a disinvestment in families of well over $500,000 in just 1 year. In Monroe alone, there are now 17 local advisory councils, and it seems this underutilization remains widespread. So, with what appears to be more than ample funding available, why are we not investing in FSS family reimbursement respite for these heroic families, families who are just asking to be able to take a little break? The best utilization of these funds, the taxpayers' money, is to invest it in supporting families as originally and according to the enacted budget ongoingly intended. And I'm going to end on a personal note. Calling people who provide CDPAP services to a loved one home paid caregivers and then excluding them from access to FSS respite reimbursement fails to recognize and embrace the character and complexity of the challenges these families face every single day and the role that they play in all of this. Their fears, the well-documented physical and emotional impact of intense caregiving, and the exhaustion from what often feels like caregiving around the clock. All of that has been lost to a label intended to exclude rather than to support and empower them. It floors me, and I'm sorry, this is a quote from a family. It floors me that those that are in the most severe crisis get little to no help or funding. I'm not trying to sound overly dramatic. It is just true. I would love to know the statistics of families like ours that are on medication for anxiety, high blood pressure, panic attacks, post-traumatic stress, fear of loss of income and property destruction that we cannot get any type of reimbursement for. This encompasses the whole family as a unit, not just the parents, but also siblings that live within the home. To take away any reimbursement from families that are paid caregivers, it is just another act of cruelty. In a world driven by data-based decision-making that is more informed by the people who actually use the services, access to FSS family reimbursement for respite for those OPWDD has labeled paid caregivers must be restored. Thank you.
Just want to keep with the agenda. We have about 9 minutes available for discussion on this topic. So we'll give the floor over to Alexis, and then we'll move on to our closing topic.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks, Chris. So I think it's really important to just make sure that the narrative around the process for this policy is very clear and understood. We have had this as a standing agenda item for several years at this point. I think, Chris, you actually had moved into the co-chair position as this ADM was being issued. Your predecessor actually handpicked who was going to be involved in the committee to review the ADM before it was published. So first and foremost, I just want to make sure for the record, everybody on the virtual meeting and in the room understands that OPWDD did not lock themselves in a room to develop this policy. This policy was requested by the statewide committee for consistency in applying this program across the state. So I want to start with that. I also want to just note that this ADM was originally issued March 10th of 2022. Since then, as of March 13th of this year, based on conversations that happened at this table, we were able to revise that clarity and that guidance to allow for any paid caregivers who qualified for other, all of the other eligibility criteria in the ADM, that they were eligible to apply for family support services, family reimbursement, specifically for goods and service. The only exclusion right now is FSS, family reimbursement for respite. And we had very long conversations around this, so I just want to make sure that we're revisiting and retracing our steps appropriately. Chris, I know that you're speaking from an opinion, and you are representing opinions of many families that you have engaged with, and I am not discounting any of that. It is 1000% valid, everything that you are saying related to the struggles that families are going through, but we do need to make sure that we are keeping this narrative correct and not pushing people in a way that is making it seem like we're not listening to what you're saying. So I do just want to ensure that those steps are retraced. And then just finally, related to direct reimbursement, for anybody who has a hardship, we are not doing a means test, right? We are not means testing this resource. Not to say that we shouldn't be, because it should be something that is provided to those who need it the most. But that is an option, and that is outlined in the ADM, and we have spoken to that in the past as well. And then finally, I just want to know if there is a formal recommendation being made by the statewide committee to please do that through the formal DDAC process so that we can review that as an agency. Thank you so much.
So I'm not going to go deep into responding on this, but I will say this: what struck me most, the couple of things that struck me from your response, Alexis, and I do appreciate it. First of all, was the engagement of the committee in the development and implementation of the ADM. I think the onerous, the genesis of this and the committee's desire to have a more consistent interpretation of reimbursement, especially, is my understanding as well of where this started, right? But I think the development of it, a lot of it went on without the level of participation that should have occurred. For example, when it first was shared with the committee, it was only shared with 5 members, 1 member from each region. I wasn't able to read the ADM, so I had to form my opinions based on hearsay. The CDPAP exclusion, I didn't even know about until a member of mine pointed out when the draft was actually put out. So I was denied an opportunity to review the ADM in its entirety before its implementation. You're correct, actually elected to chair the committee. It was a solo position at the time. That December before the ADM came out, I requested a copy of the ADM draft in order to review it and have a clear understanding of its elements. That request was denied. And subsequent to that, I recall having a meeting, I believe you and Abiba were in there, regarding some aspect of this ADM. I'm not even sure which one it was, but I requested, it was very soon before the implementation, perhaps weeks in my recollection, again, asked for a copy of the ADM before entering into a high stakes meeting, and it was again refused. So I think the level of engagement that OPWDD would like us to embrace is perhaps not as deep as some of the others would like it to be. I'll leave that participation part there. The other part that you mentioned was that you understand that this is my opinion and the opinion of many in the community. I think it's the other way around, Alexis. I think the implementation of this policy was based on OPW's opinion of what they thought they had to do. Again, where's the data to support it? Your organization has committed to data-driven decision-making. Where is the data that supports this decision? And I do appreciate you, and I do appreciate the time. Thank you.